Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Office of State Procurement's Emergency Procurement Training. We do know that there are a mixture of state agencies and quasi-political agencies here. This particular training is mainly geared towards state agencies as far as the procedures to follow, but hopefully all of you poly-subs will find some welcome information and some useful information as well. My name is Lynn Godwin. I am a manager here at the Office of State Procurement.
And my name is Claire Shaheen, and I am a supervisor with the Office of State Procurement. Today, we're going to talk about two types of emergencies. The first type of emergency is a usual emergency, and the second is a catastrophic emergency. So what is a usual emergency? A usual emergency occurs during the daily operation of an agency. Some examples are a broken water line or freezer, a tree falling on a building. These affect a single agency. A catastrophic emergency is an emergency situation declared by the governor. The governor will issue either a proclamation or an executive order, and these are generally publicized in the media. Some examples are hurricanes, floods, ice storms, pandemics. These affect a great number of people over a wide area. So the basic definition of an emergency is a situation that creates an imminent threat to public health, welfare, safety, or public property. To further describe it, it is a situation that impacts or threatens the functioning of Louisiana government, the preservation or protection of property, the health or safety of any person. The existence of such a condition creates an immediate and serious need for supplies, services, or major repairs that cannot be met through normal procurement methods. It's important to note that a simple lack of advanced planning on the part of the agency for something that they want to purchase does not qualify as an emergency. For example, if it is June 25th and your agency decides it wants to purchase a piece of equipment that is not on contract and it has to be bid out to be delivered by June 30th for budgetary reasons, this does not qualify as an emergency. OSP will always do what we can to help an agency obtain what they need, but we cannot circumvent standard procurement procedures if there is not a legitimate, justifiable emergency need.
So, let's say your office does have an emergency situation, such as a tree that fell on a building during one of those recent storms lately. So how do you proceed? Well, first of all, the Small Purchase Executive Order, which is JBE 2020-21, was recently revised to raise the non-competitive threshold amount from $5,000 to $10,000. So any agency, any state agency, can make an emergency procurement of up to $10,000 when an emergency situation arises. If the emergency procurement exceeds $10,000 or it exceeds your agency's DPA, the Chief Procurement Officer would need to give prior approval before making the purchase when time allows. If it's within your agency's DPA, then the head of your state agency or either officer's designee can approve the procurement. Also, if time allows, you should always obtain quotes, preferably from at least 3 or more vendors when supplies, services, or major repairs are to be purchased on an emergency basis. Immediate purchasing should be discouraged as much as possible, where you just contact one vendor and go with an immediate procurement. When supplies, services, or major repairs are urgently required and time does not allow the obtaining of written quotations, then you can get quotes by either phone, fax, email, But whatever vendor you end up going with, you should confirm their quote in writing. And that's so that not only you need to document the file, but you don't want the vendor to be able to change the pricing without a legitimate reason. So when you do obtain quotes, you should always try to ensure that the quotes are comparable. In other words, they're apples to apples. For example, if you have a broken freezer and you get 3 quotes, one vendor is including additional charges on his quote for starting the unit up, running tests, and he throws in a 10-year warranty. Another vendor says, well, we don't think that this freezer can be repaired, so we're going to quote you a brand new freezer instead. Well, these quotes are not comparable because the scope is different for each one. So when you're obtaining these quotes, you should try to let the vendors know what the requested scope of work is as much as possible. Also, when doing an emergency procurement, keep in mind that the scope of the procurement should be limited to only those supplies, services, or items necessary to meet the immediate emergency. For example, you have a security fence that was damaged. You can request to have repairs made to the damaged part on an emergency basis. However, you shouldn't be taking this opportunity to replace the entire fence if it's going to exceed $10,000. If the entire fence you feel does need to be replaced, just do the emergency repairs and then submit the entire fence to be bid out using normal bid procedures. It's important to remember that emergency purchases are subject to audit, so your file must be able to show that the procurements made were only done to mitigate the emergency situation, not used as a way to circumvent regular procurement procedures for a larger purchase. So whenever time allows, state agencies should contact OSP to obtain an emergency authorization number prior to making an emergency purchase if it exceeds your delegated purchasing authority, or if you anticipate that it might. You should document your file with this number and reference it when submitting the purchase for approval in LaGov and/or ProAct. So what happens if this storm comes along on a Saturday and knocks a tree down on a building? Well, if an emergency procurement need arises after hours or on the weekend or holidays, the agency should proceed with any purchases necessary to mitigate the immediate emergency situation, and then contact state procurement on the next business day to obtain an authorization number. If the purchase exceeds your DPA, the important thing is to remember to always make sure to contact OSP as soon as possible after doing what is necessary to take care of the immediate emergency. Don't wait until days or weeks later when you submit the PO in LaGov and it builds approvals to us in the system, and we have no prior notification of the situation that caused this procurement. Prior approval is also required for usual emergencies on professional contracts, but right now, an authorization number is not issued. You should, however, contact the Office of State Procurement's Professional Contract Division, and our contact information for them is on the OSP website. An annual report of all emergency purchases from the previous fiscal year must be reported to the legislature. So a letter is normally sent out from the director of OSP around the beginning of August to all agency heads requesting that each agency send in their sole source and emergency procurement purchase reports to OSP for the prior fiscal year. And this letter gives instructions and also the format to use for the reports. They're typically due by mid-October. OSP then compiles this information and submits it to the legislature. The report lists the contractor's name, the amount and type of each purchase, a listing of the supplies, services, or major repairs that were procured, and the identification number of each purchase.
The procurement handbook can be found on the Office of State Procurement's website. It's a very informative guide to all things procurement. Regarding emergency purchases in particular, there is a checklist that can be found on page 49 of the handbook. So, on the checklist, it includes, does an emergency situation exist? Does it conform to the definition in Louisiana Revised Statute 39-1598? Does the situation create an immediate, urgent need for the supplies or services? What is the dollar value of the purchase? Is the purchase within the agency's delegated authority or less than $10,000, or was approval obtained from the Office of State Procurement? The handbook still lists the $5,000 small purchase threshold, but we've updated it here to the current $10,000. So continuing with the emergency checklist, has the Chief Procurement Officer, the head of the state agency, or either the officer's designee proclaimed the situation to be an emergency? Has the Chief Procurement Officer, the head of state agency, or either officer's designee approved the purchase to be made outside of normal procurement methods? Would normal procurement methods threaten the functioning of government, preservation of property, or health or safety of any person? Was written justification explaining the nature of the emergency provided when requesting the authorization? Was an effort made to obtain quotes? Does time permit bidding of any type? Fax, phone, email, short, regular bid? Has the vendor submitted a quote or bid? Are the terms of the bid acceptable? If not already obtained, has the vendor been notified to follow up with a written quote? Is the quantity requested limited to only that necessary to meet the emergency? What is it that is being requested? When does delivery need to be made? Are installation and/or training required? Who is the contact person and what is the phone number at their phone number at the agency? Is there a shopping cart or purchase order number?
So now we're going to put up a few scenarios, and we want you to type in the chat whether or not you think this would qualify as a usual emergency. So the first scenario is a thunderstorm. During a thunderstorm, a tree falls onto a building, creating a hole in the roof. Does this qualify as a usual emergency? The consensus and the answer is yes.
So the next example is a boiler goes out that supplies hot water to the kitchen and bathroom facilities of a building that houses residents. Does this qualify as a usual emergency?
The answer here is yes.
The answer is yes.
Sorry, Claire.
No.
The next situation is there is total replacement of an HVAC system is needed for a building with 5 employees, and the building is temporarily being cooled by window units. Does this qualify as a usual emergency? The answer is no.
A refrigerator that vaccines are stored in goes out. Does this qualify as a usual emergency? The answer is yes.
The person at an agency responsible for sending in a shopping cart to order supplies is out on extended medical leave. Supplies are now running low. Does this qualify as a usual emergency? No.
A main water supply line to a patient housing building breaks. Does this qualify as a usual emergency? The answer is yes.
Very good. I think most of y'all got all of those correct. So now we're going to talk about catastrophic emergencies. And these are the kind of emergencies that most people think of when they hear the word emergency. As mentioned earlier, these are declared by the governor and include things such as hurricanes, floods, tornado outbreaks, ice storms, pandemics, etc. So the Office of State Procurement has a number of existing emergency contingency statewide contracts. These contracts were established as a result of historical needs or by agency-specific requests. These contracts are only activated during times of a governor-declared emergency. They're not available year-round because they're awarded based more on delivery times and availability, with price being a secondary concern. So you don't want to be purchasing off of these contracts during a non-emergency time because you may not always get the best price. Some examples of some of our emergency contingency contracts are generators, sand, sandbags, bottled water, ice, water barriers, pumps, MREs. There's a good many more, but these are some of the ones more commonly used. So let's take a look now at how you can find these contracts on our website. Most of you are probably familiar with ECAT. It's where you can find information on all of our state contracts, including our emergency contingency contracts. We make it easy to search for these on the site. To find them on ECAT, you type the word emergency, of course without the quotation marks, in the contract description field, shown here by the arrow. Hit enter, or you can click on Find It, and a list of all of our emergency contracts will display. Note that when you do this search, it will pull up approximately 6 pages of contracts. There are some that will come up using that search term that are not Office of State Procurement contracts. If you see a number listed in the T number field, the column, that means that it was established by OSP. If it has an agency's letters in the T number, such as some of the ones you can see here, say DCF, those are specific for that agency, so they're not available for statewide use. But if the number starts with a 9 in the T number column, then it's available for any agency to use. From here, you'll click on the blue contract number to pull up details about a specific contract. So for instance, we are now looking at the contract for emergency bottled water and sports drinks. This screen will show you the term of the contract, the buyer's information at State Procurement who handles this contract, the vendor's name and contact information, and the line item basic information. If you click on a specific line item number, for instance, bottled water, it will give you detailed information. It will also give you subcategories of that line. For instance, in this particular example, it has 3 different lines for bottled water. These are broken down according to packaging. The vendor gives price breaks for larger quantities. So line 1, if you buy 1 to 9 pallets, you have a price, and then the second line is 10 to 21 pallets, and the third line is 22 pallets or greater. So you can see the price decreases the more you buy. If you click on both View Notes and Show Additional Attachments, you can see additional contract information, such as contract terms and conditions, the full pricing sheets, special contract ordering instructions, etc. This is an example of information that could be found if you click on View Notes. And you can see it gives you the vendor contact information and some basic information about ordering. So when an OSP contract is utilized for emergency procurement, it's highly recommended to put a copy of the contract in the procurement file for documentation. This is not a state procurement requirement. However, it is extremely important to have when seeking FEMA reimbursement later. FEMA will sometimes be reviewing files several years down the road, and you may have trouble getting a copy of the contract that is expired by that time. So it's always best to print it and put it in the file in a timely manner.
So preparation is always the best way to mitigate a disaster. It's going to be a lot harder to find supplies and get them where they need to go after a disaster strikes than before. So a few steps to take prior to an emergency. Pre-buy supplies, medicines, materials, batteries, generators, and equipment believed to be essential to sustain your operation. The second step would be to have backup paper documents for use during and after disasters when mainframe systems are unavailable. And the third one is to maintain lists of procurement personnel with emergency contact information and disperse to appropriate personnel. OSP's website has an emergency procurement guide available. When there is an anticipated catastrophe, such as a hurricane, you may want to print this information prior to the occurrence. Hyperlinks are throughout the document, and you may want to link to them and print those also, just in case you lose power. This is a listing of the type of information that you can find in our Emergency Procurement Handbook. It is a very useful guide to have on hand when an emergency situation occurs. So, in summary, emergency situations are usually not much fun, but the keys to a successful emergency event are preparation prior to the event, communication during the event, document, and document all procurements processed during the event, organized, accurate record keeping after the event, and FEMA reimbursement after the event.
So we'd like to thank you for joining us today. We will take questions if there are any in the chat. So far, there doesn't appear to be any, so if you have any, type them in now.
Yes, the slides will be provided. We're going to send out a survey after our next presentation this afternoon, and the slides and this recording will also be posted to the website by the end of the week.
They said thank you. Thank you. Any other questions? Last call.
If any questions do come up afterwards, we have our contact information here, and help desk email addresses where you can send those questions.
Right. All right, well, thank you all.